Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I would like to share my October favourites. These are the books, films and TV and music that I have enjoyed throughout the month of October. However, there are a few outliers from September because I didn't do a September favourites video due to the fact that there weren't too many favourites in September of television because I was watching the same thing and there was only one book in September. So I'm going to begin with the books. The only favourite from September, the book that I've been throwing at everybody and trying to get them to read, is the Whisperwicks, The Labyrinth of the Lost and Found by Jordan Lees. Fantastic, creepy middle grade novel that I very much enjoyed. I saw the blurb for the sequel and that sounds even creepier than this one, and I'm looking forward to reading that when that book comes out next year. For me, it was the perfect sort of autumnal book. I navigate towards fantastical fiction more in autumn, although at the moment it's twisted a little bit and I'm looking for a more serious, slim novel. But I'm blaming meeting a load of booktubers at the weekend and not feeling very serious about my reading. So I think I'm just going to read one slim, serious volume and then move on back to the fantasy. But the Whisperwicks was certainly, for me, as for what I like in autumn, the perfect autumnal read. Then I'm going to move straight into the books that I read in October. And the first book from October is Tormentil by Ian Humphreys. Ian was our guest poet at Poems and Pints this month. And my goodness, this was a poetry collection that had me wondering if I even wrote poetry, if I didn't just throw words on a page and hope for the best, because this was just superb. It navigated so many themes, but felt like such a well put together collection. It was inspirational on a poetic level and on a craft level. It made me want to learn more about poetry because it made me feel like what I was doing was not correct. I absolutely adored the reading of this collection and I am so glad to have got to hear the poet read some of them. And then I have one that is a play and was enjoyed because of the way in which I absorbed this book. Kate Howe was holding a reading of this play, and due to the fact that there was a mishap last year and I wasn't sent the link to be part of last year's play, she allowed me to play Charley in Charley's Aunt by Brandon Thomas. Play is the wrong word. I just read the lines as they were written. I got to see some fellow booktubers perform their hearts out to Charley's Aunt, and it was a great way in which to enjoy this play and to learn more about it. This is a Victorian farce and there was an adaptation of it recommended, but I'm not sure whether anyone could do as well as a very specific person who pretends to be Charley's aunt within the play. When I saw Ros from Scally Dandling about the books at the weekend, she said she hadn't seen me since we'd both been very silly, and I have to say yes, this was a rather silly play and I very much enjoyed it. Yeah, so Charley's Aunt, great Victorian farce and I recommend it. Especially the stage directions. We didn't read the stage directions during the reading of it, but I went back afterwards, also reading some of it whilst we were going along, and the stage directions are weirdly a lot more involved than any stage directions I've seen in plays previously, especially considering when I was doing a playwriting course at uni, we were told not to include a lot of stage direction because that's something that a director's going to want to come up with. Yet here, it's very specific about the visual comedy that it wants to take place. And I find it a funny one to see that because in terms of comedy, and this is something I talked about in my English language course at high school, in terms of comedy, we saw a great many changes in the way that it was performed, I'd say from definitely now from the Victorian era. So in this play, we're obviously seeing a lot of visual comedy written down within the stage directions, as well as a lot of the verbal comedy. We're making syntactical comedy and play on words and just the way in which words are said, or yeah, so that sort of thing. And then with the advent of the radio play, you saw a lot of the comedy became very much about wordplay and the syntax of a sentence in order to get the humour across, the double entendre, the innuendo, that sort of thing. And this continued into the sitcoms of the 60s and the 70s that were televised. And you can see it in Last of the Summer Wine as well, which, when it begins, is very much more focused on the language of comedy, the way in which the lines are spoken, because obviously it costs a lot to perform certain visual gags. But as they progressed and they got a bit more money, you got a lot more visual gags, to the point that by the time the show was ending, the reliance came on the visual gags as opposed to the humorous gags. And then you can change that and look at the comedy Not Going Out, starring Lee Mack, which I avoided for years because it once got called the longest running sitcom on British television, and I was like, no, it's not, that was Last of the Summer Wine, and I've not got over it saying that. But I saw a few episodes of that earlier in the year, and it is very stylistic of the 1970s comedy, because there is a huge focus on lines being said, innuendo, just a bit more sweary. Sorry about that, I didn't mean to go off on such a tangent about comedy, but to see the visual gags so heavily employed in Charley's Aunt, I hadn't expected from a play of the Victorian era. So part of me is like, isn't it a shame that I can't see this as performed on a Victorian stage? At least I don't think I can. Does anyone have a gramophone recording of it? Find out for me. Then, for the first time in Drag Race history, we have a tie. I couldn't decide which book to put on the favourites list, so they're both here because, well, there were no favourites in September, so I felt like I could bulk up in October. So we have Moonfleet by J. Meade Falkner and Anno Dracula by Kim Newman. And they're both on here because both of them I was enjoying a lot. Moonfleet is a Victorian adventure novel in which John Trenchard accidentally ends up in a smuggling plot. And this is very fast-paced and, as I say, adventuresome, and I had to make sure this book hadn't been edited for a modern audience because it read so quickly. And I particularly enjoyed this book until we got to the ending, and something happened right at the end, and a decision was made, not just by the character, but by the writer. The writer made a decision to do something within the story, and I did not like it. I felt like there was no need for the thing that happened at the end of this book, and honestly, I got my writerly head on and was thinking, if I adapted this for television, how I would redo the ending of this book. And I like this book, and I like to see the twist of what would happen if Jonathan Harker hadn't been successful, if Van Helsing hadn't been successful, and Dracula had actually become the Queen Consort in London. Anyway, I like to see these characters turn up from Victorian fiction, and the way that Kim Newman had brought together all of these characters from vampire fiction and vampire film and television and that sort of thing. But I think while the final chapter makes sense, it feels tacked on given the fact that we've come to the end of the main story, and I think that the book's a bit bloated. Since the reader knows who the killer is throughout this book, and that's supposed to be dramatic irony, oh, for me, it just went on a bit too long, but also I appreciated the length of it because we got to experience all these different characters, but then I felt like it was bloated with the characters as well. So I'm conflicted about this book, just as I am conflicted about this book, but I enjoyed them both, and I would also recommend them. So they're on here as favourites, but they're favourites that also annoyed me in some way, and I think could have been done better. We then have film and television. I've shoved them all together into one category here. And so we're going to go with the television first, of which I have Agatha All Along, which a load of people have been talking about. This is the sequel TV series to WandaVision. And I really like that TV series because the Scarlet Witch was one of my favourite Marvel characters growing up and reading the comics. And I still feel like the Marvel Comics universe, films and television just don't treat their female characters well, but I think WandaVision is a great portrayal of grief and reminded me of the House of M storyline that I read when I was a teenager. And I can remember this one because I was staying with my grandmother when I found the bind-up graphic novel of the House of M, and I read that whole thing, and I found all these different books in the series and read them from the library. Agatha all along is also doing something similar, and I like the almost mirroring going on about the lost children within this series. I thoroughly enjoyed everything that I saw from the show. I've still got the final 2 episodes to watch. I've seen some spoilers online, but I'll just have to contend with that. And then we have Drag Race UK, which is on series 6. I stopped watching series 5 last year because I think I was just overwhelmed by all the Drag Race content. I can remember, yeah, I did watch all of series 4, but I think that I was just feeling a bit like the series, they weren't on a par with what I liked, but this one I have enjoyed for the most part so far. And I think we're, 4 episodes in now, so that's okay. I am enjoying my time watching Drag Race UK again. Then we're going to move into the films. And I'm just going to go in the order that I watched them. And the first one is Horton Hears a Who. We were on holiday in Whitby. Me and my mother tend to just put on Disney Plus and find something on there. Because despite the fact this house said that we were able to choose films from their television, they didn't have a very good selection. So I'd taken my laptop along, we put on Disney Plus, and we watched both Inside Out films, of which I wasn't a fan. And my mother saw this and said, just put that on. To be fair, we were a bottle of Bucks Fizz in at this moment in time. And I was going to do a jigsaw, but then I got quite interested in this film. There was a kangaroo, and I recognised the voice of the kangaroo. I don't know who she was right now. I watched this film, and I was like, yeah, this is the sort of children's film that I probably should have watched as a child, but I avoided it because I avoided anything with Jim Carrey in it when I was younger, because everything seemed to have the actor in it when I was younger, and I was like, I don't want to look at this. But I did end up enjoying this film. Then we have Old Mother Riley and the Vampire, and so I had to look up Old Mother Riley because I was certain that it was a drag character, and I was correct. I believe that there are a ton of films about this character, and they're humorous and satirical and probably way out of date for what they are, but I enjoyed Old Mother Riley and the Vampire. It made no sense to me that in the final confrontation, the vampire, who I think is supposed to be based on Dracula, had a gun. That just didn't make sense to me, and there's some weird shootout on a rooftop. That didn't make sense to me. The whole thing of Dracula wanting to build robots didn't make sense to me. It was completely irreverent, senseless, and stupid, and I liked it. And then finally, we have the film Violent Night, and this is the one where I'm a bit like, I can't believe that me and my mother watched this film and enjoyed this film, but we did. Santa Claus ends up saving a family from a load of armed robbers in a Home Alone style film, which is a 15 and is a lot more violent and had us laughing despite the little bit of gore that took place in it. You see, that's the thing. I can cope with the gore when it's the bad guys getting hurt. I'm a terrible person. But yeah, otherwise it was a humorous comedy thriller set at Christmas with a whole host of characters that you'd absolutely hate, so that at the end you wouldn't really care who lived and who died as long as the child and Santa made it out. And then music. There's only one song in music this month, because usually I hear new music from Spotify when I'm driving to work. Having no vehicle, I can't listen to anything because, well, I could listen to it in my mum's car, but my dad drives me to work. The only new music I've heard is a song by Rebecca Black called Trust. Honestly, never thought I would include Rebecca Black on a favourites list, but this song is full of catchy earworms and it got me, is all I will say about this. But to be fair, this is not a great redemption story, but I think that ever since Rebecca Black first came into things, I can remember all the hatred that people had towards her, the seething that they gave to, what was she, 14 at the time, or 13 or 14, and the death threats and everything, and the way that a child is able to grow up from that, navigate that, and like still go on to release music, I think is a great tale. Anyway, that's that. Them were my favourites for October. If you've read, listened or watched anything I have spoken to and would like to discuss it, then please feel free to do so in the comments. I hope that you have enjoyed this video because until next time, that is all.